So tonight, we finished our ring projects, or we're still working on a little bit, but I want to show you how to print these with our SLA printer. Now we have a printer from Formlabs, and I'll turn this over in a moment. There's a variety of different printers. SLA, really it's just another general term. Stereolithography apparatus, extremely very open-ended there. But where our filament printers are extruding a physical medium, and it extrudes through actually just that, extruding a heated piece of material, the resin printers have a resin bath, a liquid bath of photosensitive resin. So let me switch over to here, and this is actually the unit we have. This is a Form2. It's just one of their models. There are many different types of resin printers. This is just one type. Main one being this, often called here the DLP, digital light processing or digital light projection. And essentially what it does is, yes, your slicer program still will slice your model into a multitude of layers, but where the filament printer has to physically move all across the X and Y axis and actually deposit physical material, the resin printers, most types, the most popular, this digital light processing, digital light projection type, actually has a ultraviolet laser inside, and it basically exposes the entire screen in milliseconds. So it can do an entire layer in a couple milliseconds, or depending on the complexity of your form. Now there are different types. Some have a actual exposure, like literally a LCD screen. So think of like, any touchpad, anything like that. It actually has one of those that's like super high intensity output that is actually underneath the tray of liquid resin. It flashes that exposure. It hardens that photosensitive resin in that layer. The platform moves upward away from the bath, exposes the next layer, and so on and so forth. The actual UV laser type, like the Form, or at least the Form2 type, it has a laser that moves around. Kind of think of like a scanner inside of a checkout line scanner. It's got a series of reflectors and such that pew, 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 totally how it works, sound effects included, and projects up there, moves up. That's how it works. Now, drawbacks: resin printers usually much more expensive, depending on the actual model, the maker, that sort. Depending on the resin, many resins are proprietary. Formlabs uses specifically proprietary, both actual materials in the resins as well as their trays and resin reservoirs and such, so that limits, but they are also able to control it much more specifically, so you have a much more reliable product coming out versus the more open-ended, open source ones that have, while they're a lot more universal, that tends to be that the materials and physical equipment require a lot more individual tweaking and such. Adjustment, that was the word I was trying to find. So there's a variety there, of course, as always. There's always going to be a variety of things. One of the main things to keep in mind is, because these resins, one, are ultraviolet curing, ultraviolet sensitive, the shell here, this orange tint, is not just because it looks cool. It is actually a UV sensitive or a UV protective layer. The bottles of resin are kept in blackout bottles, so they won't be exposed to light. To fully cure these models, they don't come out of the printer fully cured. They're cured, but you take them out, wash off the excess resin in a solvent bath. We're using isopropyl alcohol. You can use stronger things like acetone, but main thing to keep in mind is, do not use those for long. Like, you do not let your model soak overnight, because the resin is not fully cured. It will degrade and possibly disintegrate your model again. It won't like return it to reusable resin, but it will destroy your object. So you rinse off the excess material, and then you can expose it to a UV bath, literal light bath. Some companies, Formlabs included, have like, it's basically like a little grow tent. It's a little LED UV strips inside of a little Mylar tent, or you can stick it on a windowsill for the afternoon. Same diff. And it's ultraviolet light, so even if it's cloudy, it's technically going to get through, so you're good. So that's the basic rundown of the difference. Well, what does that really all mean? A lot of it's just price and detail. There's as this article discusses, and I'll zip down through some of the different options. This is post-processing cleaning, like I was saying, SLA, FDM, which is the one to use. Again, there's drawbacks, pros and cons. Materials and printing volume tend to be cheaper and larger with the filament printers. Resin printers, SLA printers, much higher detail. The materials are more expensive. The print volume is smaller, but it can also tend to print much faster because it's not physically depositing material. So that's really the big difference. The major difference is cost, print volume, and speed. It's really what it comes down to. And if you have access to both, doesn't matter. All right. Well, let's show you how to actually use these things. So let me switch over. Because Formlabs has its own proprietary use, it also has its own proprietary slicer program. Now, here in the room, we have them loaded onto these computers. I actually just updated those so they're all set. But this is the build workspace. Very similar to what we've been using. I knew that was going to happen. Pardon me a moment. Let me pause here. Come on. Remember that. Okay. So this is the build, but this is the slicer build space. Very similar to what we've been working with. The main details being that you have your virtual build, virtual build space. Of course, it has different keystrokes to orbit, tumble, and such. Orbit is right-click and hold, at least on Windows. Pan is hold third wheel and pan, and then of course zoom in and out. You got it. And of course, you have the main controls, and home is a little eyeball button in this. Press F. So over here, you have your job info and such. Now, if you are not physically connected to a printer, and in this case, though we have a network here, these two are not networked. So you will have to physically be here to set them up. But they do have onboard storage, so there's no swapping of actual physical disks and such, like, or storage. So like the SD cards or thumb drives, there's none of that. You actually physically hook in, take it right to. So that also means that if you want, you can load Preform to your computer, and you can just plug in with the USB cord there, or you can use the desktop we have connected to. So with that, you will need to know which one you're selecting, but if you plug in, it'll automatically detect. So from the right here is this large build, click area. Select here, and you have an overwhelming selection of things, but that's because I currently have nothing hooked in. We are using a Form2, as it says written on those printers. We have a Form2. We are using clear resin, number 4. Like I said, it will automatically detect, as well as actually the Formlabs, the current models actually have a sensor in the large reservoir in the back, so it automatically detects what kind of resin you have. Now, this other one we have, this Form1, is remote. It can only work with the the computer it is hooked into, because it is using an outdated model or release of Preform slicer, because the newer ones will not work with the older model. So if you choose to use that one, that's fine, but it currently has a different resin. It currently has castable resin in there. So if you were in jewelry and such and wanted to actually cast stuff or print stuff that could be cast in the jewelry metals shop, you're good to go. But otherwise, we're just going to be using the Form2 over there. So like I said, if you're not sure, you can select through there, but you can obviously see there's a lot of different materials, and there's some really interesting ones. We do also have we do have flexible material, and we're going to experiment with that later. The one last thing you have is your options down here, your thickness layers. These are the same as the slicer programs, or the Prusa slicer of layer height. That's all. And it shows you fastest is 0.1 millimeter, versus where we were working fastest was 0.3 millimeters. So it's 3 times as thick, but also this is still going to print out much faster. Medium resolution 0.05 and fine is 0.025. If you are printing something like miniature tabletop figures or something with extreme detail, yeah, you definitely go with finest features. Anything more smooth, middle or fast is plenty. So like for the purpose of what we're doing, pretty well fine. For the rings, I would recommend at least the medium range, 0.05. That's probably going to be best. Finest, you could do finest, but simply because these aren't textured or anything, the rings. If they were textured, definitely go with finest. But for what we've done, middle of the row is fine. All right, so you just select apply. All right, you're all set. So over here, these will start to fill in the details and such once we actually put something in. The other side is, of course, your standard. One-click print it's going to set everything to automatic, and we're kind of going to do that. The rest of these will make a lot more sense when we actually put something in. So let's do that. Let me switch back over to Fusion, and let's get our model going. So let me close that out, get one of mine. I've stopped everything. And we'll do that one, just so it's a direct one-to-one. All right. So one of the main things you need to know is your model needs to be joined. So unless you intend to actually print the jewels separate, you want to join these physically. Now, the issue with that is the previous assignment was that they needed to be separate. All that means is at this point, join them together. So we'll go to a combine tool, select the target, select the ring. Now, if you want to keep these completely separate, select something like new component. It'll save what you've done and kick it out as a new component entirely. There we are. So my original one stayed exactly how it was. And now, I did not mean to make that uppercase, but there we are. So now I have a completely joined one. I don't know why it says settings, but let me hide the others. Now I have this one entirely, and we're all good. So rename that one. Okay, so that is joined. And because we modeled this by actually using the ring or the jewel itself as a cutting tool for the model, then it's going to fit perfectly. So we're good. All right, so select the object as we've been doing in the past. Take the model, go out to either export or 3D print. I'm going to stick with 3D print. Again, deselect the send to print utility. And this would be one of the times where you definitely want to make sure you have your refinement set to higher. Now, as we've talked about, you have your other options, 3MF, STL, and OBJ. I have found occasional issues loading 3MFs into Preform. Now, there was a just now release. I just updated. It might be solved by now, but I'm just going to stick with an STL for now. You can do whatever you want, and if there's issues, go back and redo it. Save that, printable ring. Nope, not in there. Let's just leave it in the, come on. Everything is going painfully slow today. Let me pause the recording. That actually pause. No, it did not. Okay, so that solved it. I guess it just crashed. I'm not sure why Fusion froze up there, but all I was doing was just exporting my model after I had joined the two into one solid object. So switch back over to Preform now. Now you can also open up windows and drag and drop, or you can open models like so. I'm just going with the printable ring, and you can see a couple things immediately. All right. So one of the most immediate things is you will get errors and such shown both in pop-ups as well as over on the right-hand side. But one of the most immediate things to be aware of that, unlike the filament printers, the extruder types, you cannot print models flat on the build plate of a resin printer because it has to build some sort of a platform to print off of. Now, even if like this model, technically you'd think, oh, I could flip this upside down. The ring has a big flat spot on the top. that should be a good spot. Unfortunately, the way these function, that doesn't work. It builds a raft first of resin. So let me explain what that really means. You've got a few options here. Obviously, you can scale these as need. I'm going to leave it as is. You have orientations you can do as needed. You have supports to be generated. You can paint them in and set them yourself. I highly recommend with this using auto generate for all of these. So first thing is auto orient. Now there are going to be times where you need to print or you need to control the print of these. Mainly if you have large flat surfaces, they cannot even be oriented flat. They need to be tilted, usually at least 15 degrees, if not 30 or more. That is simply because the way that the print or the printing functions on these printers, it cannot be flat because essentially, remember this how this works is the build plate is inverted. So you are already working against gravity. And if you cannot print flat on that build plate, then you cannot print flat out because you will suddenly be creating an entire single space in one plane, and it's way too easy to trap air bubbles and things like that. But if you angle your print ever so slightly, it will still print, it will still create scaffolding supports and such, but air bubbles and imperfections are far less likely to get trapped or be created. So I'm gonna orientation, I'm gonna hit auto orient. That doesn't seem right at all. That seems like the most inconvenient way of placing that. And we'll find out. It might be a problem, but there we go. And of course, I'm getting all kinds of errors here. Printing directly on build platform. Yeah, I know. And unsupported minima, that means that there are overhangs. That's really where that comes in. Or there's like cups, things like that. So let's move down. Supports. Now you have two main ones here. The raft type, like I just said. You have a full raft and mini rafts. Of course, you also have none, but that's not really as functional for what we're doing. Mini raft will, well, let me show you what a full raft does. That makes more sense. Just go to auto generate. That's going to generate them. This is a raft. So it has created this entire platform to then build all of the supports from. And now you can see why it is oriented in such an odd way, that it has all of these strain supports going up, but this is generated in a not random manner, but in a more idealized fashion, in that it's trying to minimize the amount of contact that supports have with your physical model. So that's one of the other things, and this is actually a new feature that Prusa printers have started, or the Prusa slicer and others have started. Rather than just flat grid-like supports, others have adopted this as well for filament printing. But this is where it really excels, is on resin printing. So you see all these little scaffolds here, all these little pipes, they then come to a little pointed cone. Now, when this you will have to cut these away, unlike filament printing where they'll break away. You have to cut these away, and just so you know, you absolutely should be wearing glasses of some type. If you wear glasses, you're fine, but they are tiny, they are now rigid, and they are brittle. So when you cut them away, they're very likely to clip and go flying, and they hurt a lot hitting your face, especially eyeballs. But you can see where it'll generate odd ones here, like this odd underside. It has created a support actually from the model to the model. So that's not supported elsewhere, it's only inside. So that's one of the things that will be created. Also, a neat thing is if you need to keep things separate, it'll actually put in the model name and such on the ring of your little raft. I don't know. If that's neat to you, super. The other option is if you have a model that maybe spans a wider amount. This obviously makes more sense to be in a single raft. However, if this were a larger object that had like maybe two main areas that would need to be connected, you can have mini rafts. And I'll go ahead and switch over to mini raft and auto generate that, see if it actually changes for this one. There you go. It just tries to minimize the amount of material used, wasted, but also just present. So if you had even like this, as you can see, instead of printing one solid thing, it has a bunch of little footings and such, but it still has to have some sort of a larger footing. That's why. So irrelevant which one you want to choose, it's up to you. I just recommend using the auto generate for now, and you can of course manipulate this stuff for later. And of course, there's also more advanced settings, but honestly, a lot of this stuff I have tweaked for what we're going to be doing. I would use the auto sets. Then you also have a layout, and right in the middle, it doesn't really matter where. But one of the things I want to point out is that right now you see estimated hours, 3 hours 45 minutes. Seems like it's going to take a lot. You have layers 400, hey, 747, whatever. And liters, that seems like it's a lot, but it's milliliters, so it's actually a tiny amount. One of the things is currently, or sorry, two things I was trying to think of. What happens if I decide I want to print a bunch more of these? All right, let's go to auto layout. Look how much the time changed. Hardly at all. Not a big jump in time. That is because the exposure all happens basically at the same rate. You could, if you wanted to print a bunch of these, or if multiple people wanted to, if they're in a hurry and wanted to print all the y'alls at the same time, it actually takes not that much more time to print multiples, because again, unlike the filament printers, you're not having a physical head moving around a platform and depositing physical material. This is simply a laser light show going on underneath, and it just has to hit a couple more points before it moves up. So you can actually knock out quite a few at the same time. The other thing is you can minimize all of this. Let me just go ahead and delete these. Doesn't matter. You can minimize all of these. You see it didn't really change much. 345, 430. It's fine. Wherever you want to plop this is fine. It doesn't really have any issue. The only time this becomes a problem as far as orientation is if there are variables in the print build or in the print area. What I mean by that is that sometimes there are occlusions and such, like actual like bubbles or something form underneath the print tray. And technically that means that you need to stop and clean everything. But yeah, you can get away with it a little bit, but you should not do that really. But there we go. That's really all you need to do. If you want to leave it wherever you want, that's fine. If you want to auto orient, the next step is you would have this already connected to your printer. Hit the big orange button. And again, you would obviously already have a print going, and it is, or you would have your printer physically connected. Hit upload, and it will put it onto the physical printer. There are a couple of steps on getting prepped, but these resin printers actually are auto-filling. So as long as there's resin in the reservoir, you're all set. And it will preheat itself, just like the resin printers, and it will automatically start once it is preheated. You are guided along by a series of steps. It just says, make sure the tray is clean, make sure the air valve is open, and away you go. So that's pretty much it. Main things are clean up after you're done. When you go to print these, you do need to make sure to also wipe everything down afterwards. And I'm going to show everybody individually how to do that. But the main thing is you actually physically remove the entire print bed. It's not the tray, it's a print bed. You actually physically scrape the model off into one of our sealed vats here of isopropyl alcohol, and then wipe down both the build platform, and then rinse off your model with the same isopropyl, just so it cleans off any extra muck, which is more resin. And that's all. So it's pretty straightforward. The main thing is just knowing where and what support or what buttons to push. But in all reality, I've had very good luck with just auto generate. So hope that helps, and good luck.